This was my second trekking trip to Nepal. My first trip was trekking Everest Base Camp and 3 passes in September 2023. This year in March to April 2025, Leon and I trekked the Langtang Valley for 7 days and the Kanchenjunga Circuit for 19 days. For the back-to-back trekking this year, a couple of Leon's friends, Les and Mariellen, joined us. For Kanchenjunga trekking for 19 days, it was indeed a wonderful lifetime experience in a remote region of Nepal. Some of its trails were primitive and rugged that needed to be improved. Nevertheless, I tremendously enjoyed the trip trekking with our team, 4 of us, 2 porters, and 2 guides. Meeting some trekkers from different countries, and playing some card games, Knockout Wrist and Pepito. We also met Adrian Hayes, from the UK, and Flutore Ibrahimi, from Kosovo, who were in one of climbing parties topped the Kanchenjunga summit on the 10th of May 2025. They have some incredible stories that I would omit here. Thanks to my day hiking buddy, Leon, who came up with this year's Nepal trekking trips. I really liked its back-to-back trekking for 4 weeks since it's a long way and costly from Hawaii to Nepal. On day 1, from left to right, here was Raj, our guide, Les, Leon, Mariellen, and Isaac at the Tribhuvan International Airport in Kathmandu. The assistant guide and 2 porters took a bus and met us at the Badrapur Airport. We flew from Kathmandu to Badrapur, which was about 45 minutes flight. Badrapur is geographically located 182 miles southeast of Kathmandu. From Badrapur Airport, we were on a jeep ride to Taplejung for 150 miles. It was a long 11.5 hours of driving that included 40 minutes of car issues. It was a comfortable 45 minutes flight on board ATR-72 from Kathmandu to Badrapur. Then, all 8 of us packed on a jeep, and drove 150 miles close to 11 hours. The first 95 miles, to Fidam, was paved, but the rest was a mix of paved and unpaved stretches with some rough and gravel sections. These were the beautiful rice terraces on the hillsides. Terrace farming looks so beautiful and peaceful, but lots of work are required to tend since they are typically not accessible to tractors and other large farming equipment. We finally arrived in Taplejung around 6 p.m. We were tired. After dinner, we all turned in early around 0830 p.m. Day 2 was to ride a 4x4 jeep for 3 hours and trekked about 2 miles to a guest house in Sekatham. The road was only 21 miles but was so rugged that needed a 4x4 jeep. You can imagine how rough it was for driving 21 miles for 3 hours. Before the breakfast at 0800, Leon and I had a chance to walk around the Taplejung town. This was my first time walking around an authentic local market that sold fresh vegetables, fruits, and so on. Most of the vegetables and fruits were locally grown. I bought some tomatoes and cucumbers, and ate them for 5 days since I won't able to find those in higher elevations. We were ready to rumble at 0940. On this 4x4, the driver and 8 of us, 4 trekkers, 2 porters, and 2 guides, were loaded. The jeep had 3 people sitting on each row of seats. The road was quite rough. On a couple of occasions, we had to get off the jeep because the jeep could not advance. Here was our jeep again at a roadblock. We were waiting for our turn to go forward due to road construction ahead. The jeep came to a dead end of the road. This was the trailhead to the Kanchenjunga Circuit. We were stoked to trek from here after some rough 4x4 jeep rides. Here were Mariellen, Les, 2 porters, and Leon ready to trek. The trekking portion was about 1.6 miles with 550 feet in elevation gain. Right off the dead end, it was a steep hill. The original trail was washed away next to the Timur River, so it was a newly made trail. After about 1 hour of trekking, we arrived at the Sekatham guest house ahead. For dinner, I was so hungry that I ate 2 meals: noodle soup, chapati, and potatoes. Day 3 was to trek from Seketham, 5,865 feet, to Angilosa, 7,928 feet. It was a short 4.6 miles with 2,876 feet gain. It was steep for the last 1.4 miles that gained 2,500 feet gain. Before the breakfast, Leon and I walked the area below the guest house to check out a bridge that we saw on the way up the day before. This was our room for the night. I had a good night's sleep despite the roaring Timor River just behind the window. This was the dining room. We opted to eat breakfast outside since it was such a beautiful day. This was our first group photo on the first day of full trekking. Here was our team. From left to right: Les, Kumar, Porter, Nima, Porter, Karma, assistant guide, Raj, guide, Leon, Mariellen, and Isaac. Here was Les watching a worker tying the bamboos together to carry. Mariellen and Raj, our guide, were following in the back. This was just above the guest house that was seen in the background. Here was Leon trekking just above the Timor River. The plants that look like ginger plants are Nepali cardamom. Cardamom is a spice made from the seeds of these plants. Per Google, Nepal is the biggest producers of large cardamom in the world. A couple of workers were working on these trails right next to the river. Much of the trails along the river were damaged by flooding. Here was Les, Leon, and I just before crossing one of two suspension bridges. Here was Karma, assistant guide, Nima, Porter, and Kumar, Porter. Here was Leon posing at the waterfalls. Here were Mariellen and our guide coming up a short steep slope to the lunch spot. We trekked about 3.8 miles with 2,100 feet elevation gain so far. Our guides helped cook the spaghetti for everyone's lunch. It was lots of spaghetti, but we were carb hungry and devoured all. Here was the second suspension bridge. It was about 3.4 miles in and 1.4 miles more to go with 2,500 feet elevation gain. Here was Les. Last mile or so was quite steep, gaining over 1,000 feet elevation gain. Here was Leon. We are less than 1/4 of a mile from Angilosa, our final destination for the day. Here was our guest house at Angilosa in 7,928 feet elevation. It was a beautiful guest house up on a hill overlooking south. Unfortunately, it did not have a western toilet. This was our dinner. This was where we met George and his daughter, Eleanor. They taught us the British card game called Knockout Wrist. We enjoyed the card game whenever we had a chance during our trek. Day 4 was to trek from Angilosa, 7,928 feet, to Giabla, 8,977 feet. It was about 5 miles with 2,628 feet elevation gain. It was an up, down, and up trail. It gained about 500 feet, lost 800 feet, and regained 1,100 feet in elevation. It was a drizzling day. It was pouring down around 03:00 am. Rain subsided significantly as time passed. We left the Angilosa guest house around 0840. Here was Mariellen and Raj when I passed them about 0.5 miles in. This was about 1 mile in just before the turn to the north. We met a bunch of trekkers from the UK and Israel. We came across some of these trekkers numerous times and until we were heading back. Here were some pictures before we hit the trail again. Then, I caught up Leon and took this picture. This was about halfway, 2.3 miles in, at the lowest point of our trek for the day. We supposed to have lunch down below at 1100, but it was little too early for Leon and I. We just had a tea here. Then, we continued on. It was about 2.5 miles left to our destination for the day, but with a whopping 2,300 feet elevation gain. It was up and up. Here was another view of the steep section. The Israelis caught us up and passed us here. We arrived at the Gabla guest house around 11:30. There were only a few guest houses in the area. This picture was taken from a hill above near the stupa. This was the first time that 3 of us slept in a room during our Kanchenjunga trek. We always had single or double beds. After lunch and a short rest, I hiked up to the Gampa monastery, just above the Giabla community. This was where I met George, from the UK, and his guide again. It was interesting to see that there were some houses, not guest houses, and wheat fields. They must be sustaining themselves at this 9,200 feet elevation. George and his guide, Dorchi, were approaching the stupa. We could see the portion of this stupa from Giabla community way down the hill. Here was the Giabla community about 0.5 miles down. Here were George and Dorchi going down the steep slope. We came down straight making a loop hike. On the way down, we saw this solo beautiful rhododendron flower around 9,300 feet elevation. Day 5 was to trek from Giabla, 8,977 feet, to Gunsa, 11,285 feet. It was about 6.8 miles with 3,168 feet elevation gain. We left Giabla around 0740. Leon and I wanted to get to Gunsa for lunch. Gunsa was a major trail junction that we would come back in 6 days to cross over to the east, Everest Base Camp. Leon and I steadily hiked up these stairmasters. Its steady slope gained about 3,000 feet elevation in 6 miles. We also came across the rhododendron tree forest above 10,000 feet in elevation. Here was another stairmasters. Leon had been doing very well. He is close to 79 years old. We crossed a few bridges like this. It was 3 of us trekking together for the day: Kumar, Leon, and I. We passed through Pali community. Some trekkers stopped by here for a tea or lunch. There was Leon walking on a makeshift bridge. Here was me with a GoPro. It looked quite dicey, but actually, it was wide and easy to walk on it. Here was Leon before crossing the last bridge. Just beyond the bridge was Gunsa. We arrived at the guest house in Gunsa, and had late lunch around 1300 in the kitchen. It was one of best meals that I ate during this trip. The lady was a really good cook. Here were Karma and Kumar devouring the food. This was our room in Gunsa. We stayed here for 2 nights for additional day of acclimatization at 11,285 feet elevation. After 4 days on the way to Everest Base Camp, day 12, we came back to the same room. Shower was also available for 500 rupees, $3.60. It was a tankless electric water heater. This was our toilet. Later, we found out that there were also suites with Western toilets in the suites. Day 6 was one of 2 acclimatization days prior to climbing up Kanchenjunga North Base Camp, 16,870 feet on day 10. Leon and I decided to hike to the Gunsa viewpoint at 0600, even skipping the breakfast. It was the Gunsa viewpoint to the north that we could see from our guest house. It was about 2.4 miles out and back with 1,856 feet elevation gain. It was a short, tough hill but had a very nice trail to the top. Leon was on an abandoned bridge. After crossing the river around 0.1 miles, it's up and up to the top. It was a bit chilly morning. I would say that it was low 30 degrees. Here was Leon coming up the steep hill with the Gunsa community in the background. We saw a couple of yaks, males, or maybe naks, females, on the way up and down. We arrived at the summit in just short of 2 hours. It was well done since it was 1.2 miles to the top, gaining about 1,700 feet in elevation. Here was Gunsa, 11,205 feet, from the Gunsa viewpoint, 12,805 feet. On the way down, we saw a family of domesticated goats grazing on the hillside. After about 3 hours of jaunt, we came back to Gunsa. There were already some porters coming up to Gunsa. It was a very nice afternoon, actually. It showered, only, briefly, that we did some laundries and relaxed in Hawaiian style. Then, we stopped by at a bakery for apple pie. It was sort of hyper about apple pies in the area. Well, apple pies were all gone. Here were Les and Leon. It was a very nice place to hang out since it was a sheltered area. This was where I met George, Eleanor, and Dorothy again. George, Dorothy, and I hiked up to the stupa in Gabla on day 4. This was where George and I got connected via WhatsApp. Gunsa was the last place for limited T-Mobile service on my phone. I would like to thank to the lady, guest house owner, who provided us meals as we wished on this first acclimatization day. IMHO, her food was the best during our trip. This was my dinner: momo, chapati, and dal soup. Day 7 was to trek from Gunsa, 11,285 feet, to Khamba Chen, 13,412 feet. It was a very nice day but a bit chilly morning. I wore gloves for the first time. We would come back here in 4 days on the way to Everest Base Camp, day 12. It was about 7 miles with 3,056 feet elevation gain. Its treks were mostly along the Gunsa-Kola River. This Google Earth picture does not represent well on its contours, but it was quite steep. Here was Leon, Les, and Kumar leaving Gunsa. Here was Mariellen and Raj leaving Gunsa. This was about 1 mile in. Here were our porters next to a Buddhist shrine. And here were Les and Leon. This was about 2 miles in. It was a bypass trail above the river due to the washed-out trail along the river. It was quite steep. This section was right after the bypass trail. Trail was on a steep side hill. This place could be dicey if it's icy. This picture looked like Les was riding on a yak. We took a good 10 minutes break at a closed tea house. Then, Leon and I headed up. About a halfway up, we met Adrian Hayes, who would be climbing the Kanchenjunga in a month. We trekked together for a while and shot the breeze for a while. He knew a lot about trekking in high altitude. He was a polymath and also a good storyteller that I've ever met. Later on, we found out that he was a motivational speaker, a mountaineer who climbed the Mount Everest, an explorer who explored the South Pole, etc. Adrian was also a very social person. During our treks, whenever we had a chance, we enjoyed playing knockout wrist for numerous times. Here was Khamba Chen about 1/4 of a mile away. After I settled in at Khamba Chen, I went to hike up to Snow Leopard Research Center. The Snow Leopard Research Center was located just north of Khamba Chen community, about 200 feet higher in elevation. It was a short 1-mile loop with 250 feet elevation gain. Here were some pictures from the Snow Leopard Research Center. Of course, it had a nice view to Khamba Chen community. This was the view to Langtang direction that we trekked after tomorrow. Later on, I met George, Eleanor, and Dorothy again just above the Snow Leopard Research Center. Interestingly, next day, we trekked for a while toward the Janu Himal viewpoint. Later in the afternoon before the sunset, we saw the Janu, Mount Kumbakarma, which was at 25,295 feet. It is the 32nd tallest mountain in the world. Here were Mariellen and Raj around 0530 p.m. We arrived around 1140. It started to snow around 0500 p.m. on day 9, when we headed to Langtang. Mariellen and assistant guide went back to Gunsa and waited for us to trek to Everest Base Camp on day 12. It was our second acclimatization day. The first was at Gunsa on day 6. It snowed quite a bit overnight. Many trekkers did not want to do an optional hike to the Janu Himal viewpoint. I opted to do a solo trek to the Janu Himal viewpoint. Before heading out, I took this 360-degree video. It was a gorgeous morning in a winter wonderland. Yaks were heading out to feed. And we could see the mighty Janu or Mount Kumbhakarma, which is at 25,295 feet. It is the 32nd tallest mountain in the world. An optional hike from Khamba Chen at 13,412 feet to Janu Himal viewpoint at 15,090 feet elevation was about 6.5 miles with 1,920 feet elevation gain. It was moderate. Then, here we were again. I caught up with George, Eleanor, and Dorothy. George and Eleanor were the ones who taught us the British card game called Knockout Wrist. During our treks, we met several times and enjoyed playing the card game with Adrian. Here was Eleanor, Dorothy, and George crossing on a suspension bridge. Snow was not deep enough or slippery, so we were not wearing the gaiters or the ice tractions. Here was Dorothy, Eleanor, and George again. We were around 13,295 feet in elevation. This was my last video of Eleanor, Dorothy, and George close to 14,000 feet in elevation. From here, I became a solo trekker to the Janu Himal viewpoint. This was me taking a selfie video. I felt strong all day. I was the first one on the way to Janu Himal viewpoint. Luckily, I did not have to break the trail. This was less than 1 mile from the viewpoint. To the right, I could see the glacier. Maybe it's called Janu or Kumbhakarma Glacier. Unfortunately, the clouds were moving in fast, which obscured the Janu or Mount Kumbhakarma. Per Google Earth, this structure was Camp 1. It was at the highest point. I sat down here and had a snack break for 20 minutes, hoping for the clouds to clear. The clouds were getting thicker and surely obscured the Janu. I was little disappointed, but it was a good workout and acclimatization coming up to 14,955 feet from 13,412 feet. It was over 1,500 feet elevation difference between Kambuchen and the Janu Himal viewpoint. Later in the afternoon, we were able to see the Janu, Mount Kumbhakarma, again. It was dinner time. Mariellen always shared some of her food with us. Actually, most of time, I was the most beneficiary of her food. Later in the evening, George and Eleanor came over for Knockout Wrist. They taught us this new card game a few days ago. We also recruited Raj, who was very intelligent, picking up a new card game. Day 9 was to trek from Khamba Chen, 13,412 feet, to Lunak, 15,601 feet. It was about 6 miles with 2,481 feet elevation gain. It snowed a few inches overnight. Here was a panoramic view to the south. Janu was in the view. Here was a panoramic view to the north from the Khamba Chen guest house. Here was our group picture for day 9 at Khamba Chen. Mariellen and Karma headed back to Gunsa. We would join them in 2 days and trek to Everest Base Camp together. We leisurely started at 0735. It was straightforward 6 miles of trekking on a decent trail. It was probably the easiest day so far. Here were all of us. From left to right, Isaac, Kumar, Leon, Nima, Raj, and Les in the front. We were fortunate that it was a wonderful day. Fresh snow overnight made the place the winter wonderland. Here was our gang enjoying the trek and scenery. Once again, here was Leon, Les, Raj, and Kuma. Nima was well ahead of us. About halfway, we trekked through these boulder fields. This video did not show, but there were some rough boulder sections that we stumbled and hopped. Then, up on the valley, we noticed that the clouds were moving in. We were hoping to have a better next day for trekking to the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp in 16,873 feet elevation. A couple of miles before Langtang, I caught up with Nima. We took some photos together and admired the beauty of glaciers. Langtang was on the view. Weather was still holding up decent. After settling in at the guest house in Langtang, we walked around to check out the surroundings. This was the southern views of the old glaciers in Langtang. Here was Les, Leon, and Isaac. Then, we checked out the blue sheep. It is called Barrel. Blue sheep are the natives to the high Himalayas. It was not truly blue, but it was called so due to the bluish-gray sheen of its dense, short coat. After dinner, Adrian, George, Eleanor, and Jolo came over for a British card game called Knockout Wrist. Day 10 was to trek from Langtang at 15,601 feet to Kanchenjunga North Base Camp at 16,873 feet and back. From the base camp, it's only geographically 6 miles to the top of Kanchenjunga. It was about 11 miles out and back with 2,575 feet elevation gain. It might look easy on Google Earth, but it was quite tough trekking in high altitude, mostly. At 16,000 featuring there were 3 spots quite tough that did not show well on Google Earth. We left Langtang at 06:05. Luckily, it was a beautiful blue bird day. It snowed a little overnight but did not bother us. We did not need the foot tractions. It was a bit chilly morning though. Here was Leon looking strong for a 78-year-old man. Here was Kumar, Leon, and I trekked together to the North Base Camp and back. Here was Les and our guide, Raj. This was Les' first trekking in Nepal. This was about 30 minutes in. These were the French trekkers passing Leon in the front. They did very well by staying in formation all the way to the base camp. This was about 1 hour 15 minutes in at 16,300 elevation. We divided into 2 groups. Kumar, Leon, and I in one group, and Les and Raj in another group. We took a short water break here. This was about 1 hour 30 minutes in. It was about halfway to the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp. It was such a gorgeous day. I forgot to include some still photos. Here were some photos on the way up. This was one of the diciest spots for the day. It would be fatal if slid to the moraines below. We had the foot tractions but did not bother to put on. Leon was trekking excellent in the front. It was about 2.5 hours in. This was probably the first of 3 down and up. The first down and up was the toughest. Then, the second and third were not as bad as the first, but the altitude difference of 200 to 300 feet made a huge difference. I was panting on almost any uphill at this 16,000 feet in elevation. We probably took a break every 10 minutes and snapped some pictures. After 4 hours of trekking, we arrived at the edge of the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp. This spot was actually higher than the base camp and was a better spot for the pictures. There were already lots of trekkers who left the guest house around 0400-0500. One of the guides said that he came here about 11 times and it was the best clear day ever. We were so lucky. It was such a nice day. Geographically, we are only 6 miles away from the Kanchenjunga summit at 28,169 feet. It is the 3rd tallest mountain in the world. Then, we headed to the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp. There was a lodge in the semi-bunker to the left and the outhouse on the right. Here was Trio at the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp. At the base camp, There is a memorial for Wanda Rutkiewicz, who was a legendary Polish climber and was last seen on Kanchenjunga on May 13, 1992. She was attempting to ascend the mountain when she disappeared on the northwest face, high up on the mountain. Her body has never been found. She was the first woman to reach the summit of K2 and the third woman, first European woman, to summit Mount Everest. Here was another trio and solo photo. Here was a panoramic view of the Kanchenjunga mountain ranges from the North Base Camp. On the way back, we met Les and Raj, who were about 1 hour behind. Before Les and Raj headed up to the base camp, we took some photos. On the way down, Kumar spotted some blue sheep. This was my last video for day 10. Day 11 was to trek down from Langtang at 15,601 feet to Gunsa at 11,285 feet. It was 13.5 miles, mostly downhill, with 1,181 feet elevation gain and whopping 5,537 feet elevation loss. We came back up these trails in 2 days, day 7 and day 9. Here was a group picture. Leon and Nima left 10 minutes earlier. We were leaving Langtang for good. It was another gorgeous day. I felt so good since we were done with trekking the Kanchenjunga North Base Camp on a blue sky day. Here were Les and Raj ahead of me. Here was the Janu on the left side. Les and Raj were also enjoying the views. On the way up, I was not aware of the Janu or Mount Kumbhakarma, which is at 25,295 feet. It is the 32nd tallest mountain in the world. On the way down, we only saw 2 to 3 groups. Les was approaching one of big groups. I could not remember where they were from. They even hired a Nepali culinary chef. Here was Raj and Les about 11 o'clock before getting to Kamba Chen for lunch. Here was one of rare yak convoys that we saw during our trekking. It's always good to move aside. After eating lunch at Kamba Chen, Kumar and I teamed up while Les and Raj teamed up at a slower trekking pace. Kumar needed to wait for Raj and Les. So, I started to cross-country solo to Gunsa. I saw these pretty flowers near the bypass trail. Then, I met George and Dorchi again. Eleanor was little ahead of them. I went ahead and took some videos of them. We met them in Armgilosa on day 3. George and his daughter, Eleanor, taught us the British card game called Knockout Wrist. We met again at the Snow Leopard Research Center just above Kamba Chen on day 7. On day 8, I met them again when I went solo trekking to the Janu Himal viewpoint. This was the last video for the day as the raindrops were getting bigger. I went double time to avoid getting wet, albeit I had a rain jacket in my pack. Day 12 was to trek from Gunsa at 11,285 feet to Salele Base Camp at 13,905 feet. We were crossing over to the south side of Mount Kanchenjunga. Salele Base Camp is about 1/3 way to the other side of Kanchenjunga. It was 4.3 miles with 3,135 feet elevation gain. It was short but was steep. Mariellen rented a horse for 2 days to get to Salele Base Camp and to Sarum. For 2 days, it was about 12 miles with 5,503 feet elevation gain. Here was a group picture with the horse handler. We left the Sherpa guest house around 08:05 on a decent day. The first 0.2 miles were flat, then, it was straight up, gaining 3,135 feet in 3.9 miles. This was the start of the steep section. Again, the first 2 miles gained over 2,000 feet in elevation. The horse was almost perfect on this steep and smooth section. We started trekking at time 08:00. This was close to time 09:00 when we passed this beautiful area covered with moss. The horse with Mariellen was long gone in the front. The horse was way too fast for
really
us on the
pretty.
uphill.
I've never seen moss like this before.
I was approaching the tea house at 13,200 feet in elevation. Here was the horse handler, Mariellen, Leon, and Karma. It was about halfway to the Everest Base Camp. We gained about 2,000 feet in elevation in 2.2 miles. The tea house did not look like having a guest house, but, later on, I found out that there was some limited lodging. This was about 2.5 hours in and was at 13,450 feet in elevation. Unfortunately, it was cloudy all day. It was a nice day to trek, but we did not have any views to the surrounding mountains. Mount Everest is about 70 miles northwest from here. By the way, they did very good job making this trail with the rocks. Where did they get all these rocks from? They probably got the rocks around here. It's tremendous efforts by the trail crews. This was about 3.4 miles in and was too steep for the horse. Our assistant guide, Karma, was helping her to come up this steep slope. Right after getting done with the steepest part, we took a selfie. It was tough, but all of us looked good and relaxed. Leon was waiting for us. We were less than 1 mile away from Everest Base Camp. Clouds were moving in, but it did not rain. Just before the Everest Base Camp, its trail was primitive and very rugged. Every step needed to be taken gingerly. The horse handler and Karma did excellent job keeping Mariellen safe and navigating through these rough terrains. Everybody made to Everest Base Camp unscathed around 11:25. Our guest house was up on the hill. Later on, we found out that its base camp was not for climbing a mountain, but it's the name of the place. Here was our guest house up on a hill at Everest Base Camp. I took this picture next day morning. Day 13 was to trek from Everest Base Camp at 13,905 feet to Cherim at 12,810 feet. It was about 7.6 miles with 2,368 feet elevation gain. It's supposed to be very tough with 3 passes. The elevation gain of 2,400 feet was in 4.5 miles, especially on those 3 passes. It was a frosty morning at 13,900 feet. Unfortunately, it was another cloudy day. If clear, it would have been spectacular views to the west. Possibly, we could see the Mount Everest that is about 70 miles away to the northwest. Here was a group picture before departing on day 13. We had breakfast at 0630 and early start at 0700. Mariellen was already ahead of us in the front. It was a bit chilly, frosty morning. It was cloudy up at 13,900 feet. We packed our rain jacket for just in case. We were less than 1 mile in. The trail was so rugged that the horse was hesitating to advance. It was also quite dicey with these boulders. Every step needed to be taken in caution. There were some smooth sections as well. Here was the horse handler, Mariellen, Kuma, and Leon. Les and Raj were following behind. On the way to Cherim, many sections of the trails were so primitive that Mariellen dismounted the horse and walked several times. This was my second to last video of Mariellen before getting to the first pass. The horse was too fast for us. This small slope looked quite dicey. The horse made to the second pass and determined to be too dangerous to the third pass. This was around 0830. Leon, Kumar, and Isaac were getting to the first pass at 15,170 feet in elevation. This was at the first pass at 15,170 feet in elevation. We snapped a selfie and moved on to the second pass. We were approaching the second pass. The clouds had moved in but was not raining or snowing. We could use foot tractions but did not use them. Here was Leon and Kumar coming up the second pass. We took a snack break at the second pass and moved on. Around 10:30 on the way to the third pass, we caught up Mariellen and Kumar in 15,150 feet elevation. It was the first time that Mariellen was experiencing in trekking at such altitude in her life. The horse made up to the tea house just past the second pass. Mariellen had been trekking from there. We, Leon, Kumar, and Isaac, passed them and moved on to the last pass. Nima was taking a nap there. We took a commemorative photo at the third pass, from left to right, Nima, Leon, Isaac, and Kumar. Now, we were about 1.7 miles of downhill switchbacks to Cheram. It was knee-breaking 1.7 miles with a whopping 2,600 feet elevation drop. It was the steepest decline during our trekking. We arrived at Cheram just before 1 p.m. We had lunch, did some laundry, and turned in early for 0330 am Reveille for the next day. Day 14 was to trek from Cheram at 12,810 feet to Oktong View Point at 15,550 feet. Originally, we were planning to trek up to Ramche about 4 miles, and go to Oktong View Point next day. We saved 1 day to do additional stop on the way back. The modified plan would keep our trekking team, Les, Leon, Mariellen, and Isaac, together. We were advised that clouds usually moved in around 10 o'clock near the Kanchenjunga summit. We started at 0405 to get there by 8 o'clock. The sunrise was at 0534. We had been trekking about 2 hours. We got really lucky that it was a gorgeous bluebird day. The sun was behind the mountain way ahead. This was around 14,400 feet in elevation. It was a bit chilly but was not too bad at that elevation, especially with these magnificent views in Himalayas. We stopped by at a tea house in Ramche in 14,700 feet in elevation. We had a quick drink and moved on. On the way back, we stopped by here for brunch for more than 1 hour. It was run by a couple with a young son. We were passing through a few Ramche guest houses. There were limited guest houses. Here was Leon with the Indian climbers who would be climbing Kanchenjunga in early May. Here was Kumar catching a view before the sun rose above. We had been trekking about 3 hours 20 minutes. We were about 1 mile to go. We were able to see the Kanchenjunga around the corner ahead. We were very fortunate that it was a cloudless day. Oh, I forgot to mention that it was 4 of us who went up the Oktong View Point. Kumar, Leon, and I. Looking at the Google Earth, we were trekking on the edge of the glacier moraines. Here was a view of the Kanchenjunga from the south side. We now could see a structure at Oktong View Point ahead, also known as Kanchenjunga South Base Camp in 15,550 feet elevation per my Garmin 450T GPS unit. Mount Kanchenjunga was also visible between the mountains up in the valley. Here was the structure. This was our highest trekking point on the south side of Kanchenjunga. Here was Kanchenjunga with the structure at the Oktong View Point. Here was a selfie of our gang, from left to right, Isaac, Leon, Kumar, and Kumar. Here was Leon and I. We spent nearly 30 minutes at the Oktong View Point and headed back. It was a cross-country back down, but I managed to take some pictures. These folks were part of a climbing party. We stopped by at the tea house to have brunch in Ramche. It was the place where we stopped by earlier for hot drinks. After dinner, Les presented a birthday cake to Mariellen. Amazingly, she turned 79. Later in the evening, we were able to play the knockout wrist card game for the last time with Adrian, George, Eleanor, and Jolo. Throughout trekking from day 3, we enjoyed playing knockout wrist several times. Day 15 was to trek down from Cheram at 12,810 feet to Tordung at 9,930 feet. It was one of the easiest days during our trek. It was about 6.2 miles with 385 feet elevation gain and a whopping 3,203 feet elevation loss. Its big elevation loss was not too bad since it was gently spread over 6.2 miles. Since it was an easy day, we took our time. A group of Kanchenjunga climbers were heading up to the Oktong View Point direction. They were scheduled to summit around the 10th of May depending on the weather. Then, there was a lone helicopter making multiple trips to haul out the climbers' gears, supplies, and the climbers to the base camp. We were told that the base camp was not the Oktong viewpoint but located way beyond. Here was our group picture before heading out at 0800. As we were heading out, we met Adrian Hayes from the UK and Flutora Ibrahimi from Kosovo. They were some incredible people that you might want to Google about them. They were in the same Kanchenjunga climbing party scheduled to summit on the 10th of May. For several times, we enjoyed playing the knockout wrist card game with Adrian. Today's trekking was straightforward along the Simbuakola River in the valley. The glacier water was flowing from above, Mount Kanchenjunga. For a while, I followed Les and Mariellen to get them in my videos. Here was Les, Raj, Mariellen, and Kumar in the front. It was a gorgeous day and very pleasant to walk along the river. Spring was in the valley. Here were some still photos. Wild flowers and rhododendron flowers. Yak, knack, and calf were grazing. Here was a picture of Les, Leon, and Isaac. Here was Les and Leon on a down tree taken from opposite directions. This was just above Tortung, our final destination for the day. This was like a lumber mill in the wild. Mostly, they use a chainsaw to cut down a tree and to cut into lumber or planks. This was our destination for the day in Tortung. The owner was generous that gave us each room since there were ample rooms. For the gratitude, I gave away my last batch of chocolates and a bansuri, Nepali traditional flute. Here was our porters and guides devouring the food. Its food at the guest house was excellent, similar to the ones I ate at Gunsa. Day 16 was to trek from Tortung at 9,930 feet to New Jerini at 10,900 feet. It was about 3.2 miles with 2,300 feet elevation gain and 1,250 feet elevation loss. Our original plan was to trek to Yamfudan that would add 5.7 miles with 879 feet elevation gain and 4,640 feet elevation loss. That would be a bit difficult. We saved one day not spending overnight at Ramche just below the Oktong viewpoint. The new plan kept our trekking team together since day 12. Here was a group photo before leaving Tortung. We started trekking around 0800. Here was Les, Raj, and Mariellen leaving Tortung. It was another beautiful day. Here was Les, Mariellen, and Raj crossing a suspension bridge just before getting into a steep slope. After the bridge about 0.5 miles, it was an uphill for 2 miles, gaining 2,300 feet in elevation. It was no doubt that it was a very steep hill. Its trail was new, less than 2 years old. The old trail was washed away. This was my last video of Mariellen for the day. While Raj and Mariellen slowly climbed up the hill, I caught up Leon and we steadily climbed up the hill. Here was Les. Les had been doing well. This was the first trekking trip for him in Nepal. Here was my last video of Les for the day. Its trail was steep and muddy at some sections. Here was Leon, Karma, and Kuma. This was one of the steepest sections during our treks. It was a straight up. Switchbacks would be nice. On this steep hill, I wanted to try its load of about 60 pounds. I used to carry them when I climbed mountains in Washington state.
Here's our
IMHO, it's a lot difficult to carry the heavy load using the head. Maybe it's okay if you were accustomed to it. We had been trekking about 1 hour. We were going through a rhododendron forest. It's my first time seeing such huge rhododendron trees with beautiful flowers. By the way, rhododendron is the official flower of the state of Washington in USA. I've never seen these big-size rhododendron trees in Washington state. We reached the top at 11,810 feet in elevation about 10 o'clock. In just 2 hours, we climbed up 2.2 miles with 2,300 feet elevation gain. I forgot to take some pictures, but, at the top, there were lots of trashes that we picked up and buried. We cross-country down the hill to our destination without any break. It was about 1 mile with 1,000 feet elevation drop. Just ahead, we could see a community. It was about 10:35 that we already reached at New Jerini, our final destination for the day. It looked like all the buildings were new in New Jerini. It's a very nice location with the views in 10,900 feet elevation. Unfortunately, it was cloudy. I had these for lunch: steamed potatoes, potato vegetables, and vegetable curry. Vegetable curry was cooked by our assistant guide, Kamar. It was delicious. A couple of hours later, Mariellen finally arrived in New Jerini. Our guest house was located just above the main complex. A group of international students, over 20, came and set up the tents on the ground. Some of them came from University of Washington and Oregon State University. A bunch of workers were also setting up a performance stage in the corner. There's supposed to be a concert here by famous singers in a couple of weeks. Day 17 was our last day of trekking from New Jerini at 10,900 feet to Yamfudan at 6,790 feet. Then, for 2 days, we would ride jeeps and an airplane to get to Kathmandu. For day 17, it was about 5.7 miles with 880 feet elevation gain and a whopping 4,638 feet elevation loss. Here was a picture down below around 0700. Most students were still sleeping in the tents. Here was a group picture just before heading out at 0800. Here was our team leaving New Jerini. It's supposed to all downhill for 5.7 miles. Again, it's our last day of walking. Weather was cloudy but was not raining. Just below New Jerini, here were Leon and Mariellen in front of the red rhododendron flowers. They were hometown friends about 50 years ago. This was about 1 mile down. Here were Raj, Mariellen, and Leon. Trail was nicely constructed with rocks. It was no doubt that lots of efforts were put in for these trails. We were heading to Yamfudan. I would have gone to the left looking at the sign. We went up to Sherpa Gun direction instead. This would lead us to the upper area of Yamfudan community. I loved this trash basket on the trail. This was an excellent idea. Following day 16, I was slow because I picked up most of trashes that was littered on the trail. Then, I caught up Leon, Kamar and Kumar who just crossed the bridge. Its new bridge was tilted a bit and damaged some railings. However, it was stable and safe to use. Around 12:25, we arrived at Yamfudan. So, it took us just over 4 hours. It was only 5.7 miles but had a whopping 4,600 feet elevation loss. I spent some time picking up trail trashes. We also spent some time eating raspberries. After settling in, we took a bucket shower with cold water, did some laundries, and checked the messages since my T-Mobile service was working. Note that the trees left of the building were the fig trees. Those were my first time seeing such big fig trees. Day 18 was to ride a 4x4 jeep for 108 miles from Yamfudan to Kanyam. It was a long and rough 11 hours of 4x4 jeep ride that included rough road delays and having lunch on the road. This was our last team breakfast together at 0600 at the guest house in Yamfudan. We left around 0630 departure for a long 11 hours of 4x4 jeep ride. In my rough estimates, the gravel road was only 32 miles. On day 18, this was the treacherous moment that the 4x4 jeep could tumble down the steep hill to the right. It was a very tense moment. The driver did an excellent job pointing the front wheel to the right direction as he backed out to safety. Look at the crack here. The jeep could tumble down the hill any moment. A view of beautiful terraces on a hillside. It felt to be good on the paved road. We finally arrived at a guest house after 11 hours on the road. Hello. At the end of day 18, it was our last group picture. Our 2 porters and the assistant guide continued on to take a bus back to Kathmandu. Our last day, day 19, was to ride a jeep for 0.5 miles up the hill to check out a tourist area for 1 hour in Kanyam. After the tour, we rode on a jeep for 28 miles on a paved road about 1.5 hours to Badrapur Airport. Then, we took a flight from Badrapur to Kathmandu. Here was the tourist area 0.5 miles up from the guest house where we stayed in Kanyam. Here was Mariellen. Leon and I hiked to the hill behind Mariellen. It had a grandeur view of the tea farms. At the hill, we met again with the trekkers whom we met at Langtang. Here was a 360-degree view of the tea farms in Kanyam. It's already hazy from pollutions coming from Kathmandu. Nevertheless, it was nice to hike up here and take some videos. Here was Leon, who was taking some pictures and videos as well. Leon did very well trekking both Langtang Valley and Kanchenjunga Circuit back to back. Here was a short video of the shops in Kanyam. I bought some green teas for Raj and Les as well to support the local economy. After a short and fun excursion in Kanyam tourist area, we jumped on the jeep just less than 2 hours to the Badrapur airport. I felt really good to be walking to the airplane on the tarmac. It was about 45 minutes flight back to Kathmandu. Our 19 days of trekking Kanchenjunga Circuit was ended safely. Thanks for watching my video. I am a free Hawaii hiking trail guide. Hope you subscribe to my YouTube channel and be notified when I make a new video of my outdoor activities.